Okay, so can we just understand what we're dealing with here specifically? Antitrust is a broad matter, so what specifically is the problem?
You heard it just at the very end of the call there. This is Section 2 of the Sherman Act as opposed to Section 1. Section 1 is agreements. Section 2 is monopolization or attempts to monopolize. And that's a question of how dominant are you? It's not illegal to be in a monopoly under U.S. law. What's illegal is to use anti-competitive means to gain your monopoly or to maintain your monopoly. So what they have to prove is not just that Google is dominant, has a dominant position in some relevant market. They also have to prove that they either gained it that way or they've maintained it through some anti-competitive means.
David, how far could this go? Could this ultimately mean that we could see Google being broken up? There are questions being asked about that.
Well, could you, Guy? Yes, you could. That's what you saw with AT&T a long, long time ago. Way back in the 80s, there was a Department of Justice suit against AT&T on monopolization grounds, and ultimately that's what broke it up. That's how we got the baby bells. There used to be just one telephone company for the whole country. It doesn't exist anymore. But it is rare. It is a difficult thing to do as a practical matter. You saw with Microsoft, for example, the suit back in the 90s. That did not end up with a breaking up. There was some behavioral modification, but no breaking up. And ultimately, the Microsoft case really did not succeed in really having Microsoft lose. It more slowed Microsoft down in the meantime, because as you've just heard, these things can take years and years and years.
Well, so let's talk about then the impact of the stock. Alex Webb, Bloomberg Opinion tech columnist, also joins us from London. Alex, you heard David kind of set it up like these can take years and years and years, and yet Google stock is actually up today. So I'm wondering how the market's actually thinking about this.
I think there was a dip in the pre-market, clearly in anticipation of the worst. Perhaps the market seems to be thinking it's not as bad as might have been expected, or the worst fears. But it is nonetheless interesting. This seems to go beyond some of the measures that were proposed in Europe. We saw similar efforts in Europe to tamp back Google's agreements with phone makers in terms of forcing them to use its search as the default setting on Android phones. This is going even further than that, talking about structural remedies. We know that actually in the U.S., the DOJ tends to lean more towards structural than behavioral remedies. A structural remedy is the sort of thing which would see the breakup of Google, or at least a separation of some of its operations. A behavioral remedy is more about saying, stop doing this one individual thing in your business and try and working with the company to ensure their business is set up in a way that fosters competition. So, I think there is a realistic possibility of this would fundamentally change parts of Google's business. But as David said, this could take a very long time to actually happen.
And then, David, just to round this out here, in the lawyer world, what does Google do now?
Well, they have to immediately respond to their complaint. I mean, they'll take some time. They'll get an extension on that. We got an extensive complaint here. They're being sued, of course, not just by the Department of Justice, but also by 11 state attorneys general as well. So the next step is you respond, and they will deny a lot of things in the complaint and take issue with it. You now have motions practice, as you say, which will go on forever as a practical matter. There will be a lot of procedural rounds. But you also can't avoid the politics of this. Remember, the Department of Justice Antitrust Division actually has sort of been displaced here because the head of that division is recused. It's actually been Bill Barr, the Attorney General himself, who said, we want to bring this lawsuit. And in the meantime, you have Congress, the Democrats in Congress, saying we want to break up the big tech as well. So there's a whole political dimension to this on both the Democrats and the Republican side. One point in Washington where there seems to be bipartisan agreement.
We break news on YouTube for YouTubers.